Hi, everybody. Mitch Tanenbaum here. Thanks for joining me today. This is the security news update for July 31st, 2022. In the first item, uh, insider threat, I've always said is a big challenge for organizations. And here's one that kind of blows your mind. Charter Cable got in trouble because one of their employees went to a customer's house and very sadly murdered the customer and stole her credit cards, and was eventually caught after doing that. And what they said was that Charter's security practices were not very good. They fined them like $400 million in actual damages, and then another $6 million and $6 billion in punitive damages. So, and Charter had done some bad things, like they decided they didn't need to do background checks and stuff like that. So I think the moral of the story here is that your insider threat program is important, and you better do it right, because if something bad happens and you don't do it right, then there's going to be hell to pay. Also on the insider threat world, the Spanish National Police have announced that they've arrested some ex-employees for breaking into the network, which I guess since they were employees, they didn't have to break in, and they disabled about 1/3 of the nuclear radiation detectors. Spain has a large number of nuclear reactors, and they have a network of about 800 radiation detectors that span the country, and they disabled about 1/3 of them before they got caught, or before they got discovered. Actually, it took them about 2 years to actually catch them. But this is another example of an inside job where I assume they were disgruntled and they decided they were going to get even with folks. So, one more time, insider threat program, very, very important, because sometimes the insiders can be really, really bad. Next, I said last week that Microsoft had temporarily stopped blocking Visual Basic macros, VBA macros, and now they have resumed blocking them. Apparently, it was something to do with the way they had set up the notification that people were getting. It was unclear or whatever. So it was a relatively minor thing. It sounds like they were able to fix it pretty quickly. So all that's good. They're back to blocking macros again. For those of you who follow the woes of the patent world, like me, you know that people love to file patents in Texas. In particular, they like to file in the Western District of Texas, because up until this past week, unlike the way trials normally go, where you kind of get a judge picked randomly out of a fishbowl, in the case of these patent trials, there was only one judge who heard patent cases. There's Judge Albright. He's kind of a strange dude and has some very favorable beliefs in terms of the patent holders. And as a result of that, folks knew exactly what they were getting when they filed the patent lawsuit. Now the administrative officer of the court says, no, we're going to go off and do this randomly, just like we do all the other trials. And you may get a judge in Austin, you may get a judge in Waco, may get a judge in Tyler. There's no telling. Probably what that means is we're going to see a pause in patent filings until people can figure out, well, what does this actually mean? But I think that's a good thing, because clearly Judge Albright was running a bit of a kangaroo court, and it really wasn't fair to anybody. So, and next, Uber has agreed to settle with the feds. I've often said that lying to the feds about a breach is really not a great strategy. Uber discovered that the hard way. They're going to pay $150 million and do some work on their security program, all of which is good. But there's still a criminal case against their former CISO because he agreed, and I'm assuming corporate management was behind this, because I can't imagine he did this by himself, that that they should pay off the hackers in exchange for the hackers destroying the data and not telling anybody that they hacked Uber. That's really not a great strategy. You get in trouble over that. And they did, and they eventually decided that it would get really, really ugly if they went to court, because who knows what would come out then. It's probably going to be really, really messy, I would bet. Next, the Department of Justice has published the third edition of their digital exhaust opt-out guide. Basically, what this is, the guide, it's designed for law enforcement, but it's a guide to reduce the amount of breadcrumbs that you leave behind when you're online. It's like 200 pages. It's every online service you can imagine with some specifics for each one of them. They update it every year or two, which is great. It is not available publicly, but if you're interested in it, let me know. I am allowed to send it to you privately. That's a good thing. If you're concerned about your digital exhaust, then that's probably a good thing. I guess this week is a week about settlements. It's interesting. So T-Mobile agreed to pay a $350 million fine plus $150 million to improve their security. Remember, T-Mobile has probably got the worst security of anybody I've ever seen. They've had like 5 breaches in the last 4 years. It's not been a pretty sight in terms of their customers. Unfortunately, from a customer standpoint, because of the number of records involved, it probably means you'll get enough to buy a Big Mac meal, fries included. But beyond that, you're not going to get much. So it's not going to really mean much to the end consumer. But it's probably a good thing that T-Mobile agreed to spend $150 million to improve their security practices. Next, hackers are an interesting group. So apparently there's at least some hackers who are unhappy with the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And what they've done is they've gone in and hacked a bunch of evangelical organizations that supported that activity. And they've leaked about 75 gigabytes worth of data from those groups who filed briefs with the Supreme Court in favor of overturning the law. These groups, in theory, use their faith-based practice, right? Because you're not supposed to be a political or lobbying arm if you're not, a religious organization. But apparently, they were doing this anyway. So in this particular case, they basically unhid who was donating to them, and the conversations going back and forth and stuff like that. So pretty embarrassing to those organizations. I think in general what it means is, kind of like what we're seeing in Ukraine. If you upset the hackers, they may well come after you. That's a definite possibility, and you may not like the results of how they do this. Guess you'll never guess. They hacked one of their vendors. This is where your vendor cyber risk management program becomes so important. I harp on vendor cyber risk management all the time. This is a great reason why. They didn't hack the organizations, they hacked their vendors. So that's the story. So in terms of some of the other things, I never understood, maybe everybody else did, and I'm just dumb, which is certainly possible, why the government was so adamant about banning Huawei and some other Chinese companies. And we're now finding out the reason why, which has nothing to do with them. Well, probably has something to do with, but it's not so much about them hacking the cellular communications. It's about the fact that it appears that these guys are putting a few extra receivers in the cell sites, because these guys maintain the cell sites. And it's not just cell sites, it's other places too. So, their plan was to go off and compromise data by eavesdropping in especially sensitive places. If you've got a cell tower that's a couple of miles from a military base or a nuclear launch site, well, you might be able to pick up some interesting information there that might be interesting. So that's why they barred these guys, much more so than worried about you calling your mother and setting up a lunch date for next week. Next, in wake of all these breaches, insurers are looking and literally not looking, they are doing rescinding policies. They are filing lawsuits. It depends on the state you're in. Some states it's easy to do, some states it's harder to do. But they're saying, gee, we're looking at your application, we're looking at the questionnaire that you completed when you applied, and if you have a breach and they discover that what you were doing now or what you were doing at the time doesn't match what you said on the paper, they're going to go off and pull back their policy and not give you any coverage and obviously not renew the policy. So it becomes very important to make sure that you are literally following the letter and not the spirit, not twisting things, because these guys will go off and take you to court. And even if you ultimately win, you may spend $100,000 in court costs winning. So is that really worth the deal? If you need help with those questionnaires, let us know, because I do know they are very confusing. Most people think that they own cryptocurrency that they've bought. We have a situation where one of the cryptocurrency companies exchanges filed for bankruptcy. And now what we're discovering is that the cryptocurrency that you have stored at those exchanges is part of the bankruptcy of state, and you are an unsecured creditor, not a secured creditor, but an unsecured creditor. And in theory, they're saying if you have some dollars in this company, that you will get the dollars back, but no telling when. And if you have crypto, then they want to give you some NFT tokens, which are worthless, and some shares in the reconstituted company after the bankruptcy, which could well be worthless too. So, a word to the wise, there typically is no insurance. So you've got a situation there where you think you have some significant amount of cryptocurrency, it's being held in an exchange, you may or may not have any money there. So I would carefully check all that out and see what you really have. And finally, the TSA right after the Colonial Pipeline breach, they released some so-called cybersecurity guidelines for pipeline operators. It was a total fiasco. TSA had no clue what they were doing. They had like a dozen people in the entire agency in their Internet of Things organization, and it was a complete disaster. So now they've issued version 2 of the guidelines. We'll see whether version 2 is any better than version 1. It's probably at least a little bit better than version 1. We'll see whether it's significantly better than version 1. But that's been released at this point. I've always said that you have a couple of days between when a patch is released and when the hackers start exploiting it. Well, now we're hearing that hackers start scanning for vulnerable systems within 15 minutes of the patch being released. So this is kind of a triage system. You can take the newbies, the script kiddies that work for the hackers, and say, okay, you guys run the scanning operations while we figure out how to exploit the vulnerability. But you now have about 15 minutes. So moral of the story is, it's really important that you, at least for the high priority patches, get those deployed pretty quickly. Next, the federal court system, they admitted that they got hacked in 2020. They never really told us very much about what happened. They never really told us about how wide it was. What they did tell us was, if you're filing documents with the court system under seal, you're no longer legally allowed to go file those electronically. You must file those on paper, because they figured they could lock the file cabinet easier than they could go off and lock the system. There's now some congressional hearings about that, and we are discovering that the breach was actually significantly bigger. And there may be multiple breaches, and they're really not telling what's going on. So we really don't know, but it sounds like it's a big mess. Next, at least at the moment, it appears that ransomware attacks are going down. We know that they go up and down. So whether this means something, we really don't know. But at least for fourth quarter and first quarter, attacks seem to be down at the moment. So cross your fingers that maybe means good news, but I'm not counting on it. And finally, Apple traffic last week was routed through Russia for about half a day. Apple, of course, is being very quiet about it because that's what Apple does. They just hope it misses the news cycle and nobody really cares. Very embarrassing for Apple. Any traffic that was there, you assume that it's been compromised, whatever it is. And even if it's encrypted, what Russia is doing, and this is no accident. These are never an accident. They hold on to that data, and when they get to the age of quantum computing, they will decrypt that data and see if there's anything interesting there for them. And that's it for today. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. And certainly if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know. Until next week, be safe, and thanks for listening.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.